Hello, everyone, those who are slowly starting to join us. We'll give it a few minutes just to let everybody who's in the waiting room to start getting in. So I know that there are many people joining us from across the globe. So whatever time zone you are in, welcome to today's webinar. I'll give it just a little bit more, just time for people to be able to start joining us. But please do send any messages in the chat box and let me know where you'll be joining from. Send your flag. Let's find out where everyone's joining us from. That would be nice. Okay. So I think we can start and people will still start joining us. And hi, Tapua from Zimbabwe. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. It's nice, all the way from Zimbabwe. Okay, so today's talk is a conversation with Her Excellency Miss Amina Gurib Fakim. She's the former president of Mauritius, and it's really just a conversation with her, just to find out about her career, to find out more about her leadership and the work that she does as a scientist, and also on entrepreneurship, as she's also an entrepreneur. So I'll start by giving her a little bit of an introduction. So Her Excellency Amina Gurib Fakim, she has been the Managing Director of the Centre International Development of Pharmaceutique for Research and Innovation, as well as a Professor of Organic Chemistry with an endowed chair at the University of Mauritius. And since 2001, she has served successively as the Dean of Faculty of Science and Pro-Vice Chancellor. She has also worked at the Mauritius Research Council as Manager for Research. She earned a BSc in chemistry from the University of Surrey and a PhD from the University of Exeter. She is a founding member of the Pan-African Association of African Medicinal Plants, and she co-authored the first ever African Herbal Pharmacopoeia, and she has authored and co-edited 30 books. And in June 2016, she was on the Forbes list for the 100 most powerful women in the world, and first among the top 100 women in Africa Forbes list 2017 and 19. She is honored as one of the Foreign Policy's 2015 Global Thinkers, and she served as the first elected woman president of Mauritius from 2015 to 2018, and is the first Muslim woman head of state in Africa. Miss Amina Gurib Fakim, thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be chatting with you.
Thank you. So just to give everyone a bit of an overview on the format of the talk today, I'll be in conversation with Miss Amina for around 40 minutes. Then I'll open up to any questions that you might have. And please do use this opportunity to put your questions to her, because it's not every day that you get to ask a former president questions and get to draw upon her wealth of knowledge, not only in politics, but in business, leadership, the sciences, and entrepreneurship. So please do, at the bottom of most of your screens, depending if you're on a computer or a laptop or on your mobile phone, there should be a chat box where you can put your questions in, and I will endeavour to put them to her for her to answer. So let's get started. So for those who are not familiar with your story, you were born and raised in Mauritius, and you've always had a keen interest in the sciences and your environment around you. So can you tell us a bit about your early life and what sparked that interest in terms of getting involved in science?
Again, thank you so much, Lisa Marie. You know, I've had a very eclectic career, and I will explain how it all started. You know, I grew up in a very small village in Mauritius. A small village which was next to the airport, it still is, and it's a village where there was practically nothing to do. in as much as we were talking about pre-independence days, because Mauritius became independent from the UK in 1968. So it was a village where I had a very cocoon life with my brother and my parents, of course, with an extended family. We all grew up in the same yard. And so I had the great pleasure, now I look back with hindsight, how rich this childhood was, because I was surrounded by people who loved me and who I loved, and it was a very, very special moment. And I hail, as you have rightly said, from a Muslim family. But my parents never budged to send me to a Catholic school. So I've been with I stress on this so much, Lisa Marie, because to us in this, in a very, very, in the world we are living in, where there's so much division by virtue of race, religion, and all the rest of it, I think it's good to highlight this point. So I grew up in this small village as a Muslim girl. I went to a Catholic school, and my neighbors were Hindus. They were all sorts of people of different religion. Now, it is perhaps one of the very small village, one ever unique village, I hope, that you'd have one temple, one church, and one mosque within 1 square kilometer, and we all live peacefully next to each other. So I grew up with this richness, this diversity, which I took for granted until, of course, I reached the UK eventually, where I realized how much these village people have given me. Anyway, I grew up in that village, and then I went to the Loreto school. You know, the Loreto Convent school was run by Irish nuns who were serving, of course, their terms in Mauritius. So I had them as teachers. And I started my secondary education in one of the Loreto colleges, which was not very far from my village. And there, you know, it was I was a second batch of that school, so there was hardly any infrastructure there, in as much as the labs were very, very sparsely equipped. So what the teachers did to teach us, of course, science, and as you know, science is a very practical subject. It has to be made very interesting. It has to be made very practical for kids to be able to grasp the concept. And what these brave teachers did is they took us to the rivers, they took us on, you know, to the forest, and they taught us the web of life. And this is what kindled my interest, because I was saying to myself, wow, so these teachers had an answer to a very inquisitive 11-year-old, 12-year-old, around that age when I was in school, in my secondary education. And they could demystify all these very technical terms and explain to me in a very, very simple language what science is all about. And then there were two very important moments during my childhood, of course, adolescent years, that really made me think that science was for me. The very first one, of course, was the moonshot moment, when I saw live on our TV the landing of man on the moon. So I saw Neil Armstrong take his very first step and say this very famous word, which said, of course, one small step for mankind, one giant step for humanity. And the second time was what happened in the UK, when you had the birth of the test tube baby Brown. And of course, by that time, I was finishing off my A-levels, and I was saying to myself, wow, if science can be so transformational, and I have this passion for science, I'm going to make a career out of science. And of course, chemistry was my pet subject. So one day I said to my dad, he of course gave me choice, said to me, you know, you can choose what you want to do, because at the end of my A-level, because we did the Cambridge A-level, I took up a small job in the Ministry of Health, where I was working as a clerical officer. And, you know, my father said to me, you know, why do you want to go? You already got the job. I said, Father, I can't dream of just stamping envelopes all day. So I think I will try something else if that's okay with you. So I was very lucky because I had very supportive parents. My mother was always, of course, she was the backbone, of course, all mothers are, you know, we build the rock, the family around them. And she was very keen for me to have an education. And although I was a girl in that village, my parents, both of them, they were very keen to educate their daughters. And again, this is a point we'd like to make, because at that time, it was not a given to educate a girl. Educating a girl was considered a waste of money because it made economic sense to educate a boy. When you educate a boy, of course, the boy is supposed to look after the parents when they get older. So it made good sense to educate a boy. So they decided, no, they will give my brother and myself equal chance. So I can safely say my best cheerleaders, they were my mother and my father, and uncles, and all the rest of it came afterward.
So you've
So then,
mentioned that you had incredibly supportive parents, but you
yes,
also have shared a story of I think it was a careers advisor.
yes, I was going to come to that.
Ah,
Yes.
okay, go for it.
So after my A level, my father said, you know, before going to study or to make a career choice, why don't you go and visit the career guidance officer, because he was there with the ministry, and seek his advice, because, you know, he may have some ideas as to what you can do when you come back. So I went to see him. And as soon as he saw me walking through that door, he said to me, you know, what do you want to study science for? I said, you know, because I like it, I enjoy it, you know, I practice science every day, all the virtues of science. And he said to me, I wouldn't advise you to do that, because science is for boys. And then he said to me, you know, by the time you come back, there'll be no job for you, because, you know, you're not meant to be doing science. You're meant to be doing the soft sciences, you know, you're meant to be doing the social studies, you know, that kind of stuff. But chemistry is a hard science. That's for men, for boys. So I said, okay, thank you very much. I went home and I said to my father, this is what the career guidance officer said. So he said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do science. So he said, well, do as you like. Okay, so that was it. So I followed my heart. And then I got admitted to the University of Surrey. And again, the question was, I mean, this was, of course, very, very foresighted. I was discussing with my dad. I said, you know, he suggested you should go to the University of Surrey. I said to him, why would you advise me to do that? Because I already get admission. He said, you know, it's perhaps one of the few universities at the time that will give you 1 year out in industry in terms of work experience. So he said, you'll get an idea as to whether this is really the field you want to go in. And lo and behold, this was, of course, a fantastic decision to make at the time, because it was one of the few universities offering sandwich courses. And for my third year, I precisely went to work in a very big agro industry, American agro industry, which was based out in Norfolk. And that taught me the ropes for doing research. So all in all, it worked out very well. And then by the time I finished my BSc degree, I got my degree, I managed to get a scholarship to do my PhD at the University of Exeter. So there I went. Again, I must highlight that this would not have been possible if my parents didn't pay my fees, because again, this was something which was colossal at the time, because Mauritius was not doing well economically. We had just come out of independence. There was rampant unemployment, and the currency wasn't doing well, and it was considered one of the least developed countries at the time. So these were very, very bold decisions that really shaped my career, and I'm so grateful to them to this day for the sacrifice they made to make me have an education.
Mm-hmm. So you came back after your studies to Mauritius, and you had quite a varied career. You were a professor as well as doing your research, and then you started up your own lab.
Yes, so there's a long story to this, because by the time I came back to Mauritius, again, I was all set to go to the United States, because I had my green card. I had got a postdoc I remember in Louisiana, and I was all set to go. I came back home, and of course, my parents said, are you going to go back again after 7 years you spent outside? So I took up a position at the university, and I was teaching chemistry, agricultural chemistry. But the passion to do science, the passion to do chemistry was still there. And when I came back to the university, I was really disheartened, because the infrastructure wasn't there. Right? It was a country that was just about emerging out of the major recession we had post-independence. So the infrastructure wasn't there, but I knew that to survive in the world of academia, you had to publish or you perish. And if you decide to publish, you have to have novelty, because you're competing with the big players in this field. So this was when the search for science, the search for chemistry took me to the world of plants, because we are a biodiversity hotspot in Mauritius, along with Madagascar. We are a biodiversity hotspot, which means there were unique plants, and by extension, there were unique molecules to be discovered in this area. So this one, I started learning about taxonomy, about botany, and then I went to do phytochemistry. And this is when I was, again, there is a saying that Victor Hugo said, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And the time I was lucky to be at the right time in the right place, because I benefited from a big grant, which was given by the time, because there was no European Union at the time, there was the European Development Fund. They provided a big grant for the study, for the development of a herbal database, a medicinal and aromatic plant database for the region. So I started working on this. And then I must also share this small story with the people listening to us. You know, when you're a chemist trained in the West, you come back to a developing country like Mauritius, you start at the university where the mentality is very silo at the time. You know, when you do chemistry, you do only chemistry, you do biology, you do only biology. And there I was, a Western trained organic chemist coming to Mauritius and started working on weeds. And I was a laughing stock. And people said, oh, come on, you cannot be serious by working on weeds and pretending to get results. But I was all set. I was pretty stubborn, you know, you call it badass nowadays, but very stubborn young woman. And I carried on, and I published the very first book on the medicinal plant on one small island of Mauritius, the plant, the medicinal of Rodriguez Islands. And this was the beginning of the journey. And
how was that book received when it first came out, seeing as though it was the very first one?
People started then taking notice. They thought, well, maybe there is something, but still, you know, there's a lot of jealousy in the academic world. I suppose in all walks of life, in professions like this. But it was so much so because I was not perceived to be very credible until that book first came out. And then I didn't stop. Then I published the entire database of the medicinal plants of Mauritius. And interestingly, Lisa Marie, this work now, which was published well, I finished the publication in 1997, constitute prior art at the World Intellectual Property Organization. So which means that anybody who wants to work on the herbal medicine, which has been documented, can do that, because, you know, it has to be over 20 years. 20 years of use of acceptance in the country, and 20 years, of course, post recognition outside. So now it constitutes a very important database. And also I would like to stress on something. This is an area which is unfortunately grossly missing in our continent. There's so little documentation of our traditional knowledge. And so this is something that we have to address. It's a weakness because transmission in Africa is oral. And we know how important this traditional knowledge is, especially when we saw in 2015, when the Chinese scientist, Du Yu, got the Nobel Prize for the discovery of artemisinin from the Chinese herbal pharmacopoeia. So we have to take this seriously. We have to start documenting our traditional knowledge. And this is something that I managed to contribute at that level. So to come back to my journey, I joined, I did all these publications, and I started climbing the ladder, of course. And people said, you know, this is not serious, but I still maintain it because I was contributing internationally to knowledge coming from my part of the world. So it was novel. And I became the very first woman professor in 2001 in Mauritius at the university. And so that was the beginning of a few first.
So let's move on now to politics. Yes. And as the first female elected head of state in Mauritius, how significant did it feel to you to become the first woman president in the country?
Well, I describe myself, Lisa Maria, that I am an accidental president because my career was never destined to be anywhere close to the world of politics. But it happened. But, you know, I'll surprise you by saying that what I think that this nomination, this appointment as head of state, I think it means more to that girl growing up in my village, that she can say, yes, it's possible. It's possible to reach the highest office of the country through dint of hard work and without having to dabble in the world of politics, or sometimes the murky world of politics. So I did it through sheer the capacity to take risk. I did that because it was a big risk to take. And so I did this, and you know, it's very important for role model for these girls growing up in my village to know that it's possible.
And did you anticipate how being president would change your everyday life? Like, how did it affect you and your family as well?
Well, there are of course many ups and downs, and it's not an easy ride being there. You know, I was always told that it's lonely at the top, and I've lived it. I know how lonely it gets, and how people tend to gravitate around you when they want something, and when things go bad, then they of course run away. So it's a world which is, you know, it takes a lot of getting used to. But it's been a great experience. It's been a great opportunity to serve my country as well. So to me, these are the plus points. But having said this, it's not easy to be managing, because I always say to my children that, you know, being at the presidency, being in the world of politics, is as if you're walking on eggs without breaking them.
Mm-hmm. You did, so you brought a unique perspective, I guess, when you were a president, because of as your role as a chemist, and the fact that Mauritius is rich in biodiversity, as you was mentioning just a bit earlier. I know that the country provides key materials. How did you incorporate your work as a scientist into your role as president?
It's a very interesting question, and I think this is a narrative which has to change on the continent. I always look at the African continent as having, you know, we are a very old continent. We have a huge history. We have massive culture, everything that's going for us. But I look at the past 60 years in terms of the history of the continent, because this was the countries, of course, they started getting independence. So we've had 60 years of post-independent history. And if you look at the history of the continent immediately post-independence, you could see many generals, many heads of armies at the helm of the country. But now this is changing. We are seeing more technocrats, we are seeing more engineers, we are seeing more, you know, lawyers and doctors, and you name it, we see that. So for me, this is a positive move. Why it's a positive move? Because you need to shape this narrative so as to create opportunities for the young people. And we know that creating opportunities for the young people will start when we help them cross the valley of death, taking the ideas, taking the innovation, and converting them into an enterprise so that they become employers as opposed to become job seekers, because there will be no jobs for the 11 million graduates landing on the job market every year. And this is the state of Africa as we speak. And we also know that the African continent is the youngest continent, with a median age in some countries between 16 to 18. Now, with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, we have seen how each of the SDG is a system. And if we deliver on these SDGs, we will have a prosperous world. But by 2030, with COVID, which is with us, I doubt that we'll make all these gains. But we still need to be able to have this language of entrepreneurship, of science, of innovation, because through innovation, we can ensure wealth generation, we can ensure job creation, we can ensure entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. So that's why I use whatever I have gained in my previous lives to shape the narrative. Increasingly now, I do a lot of lectures across the world, and my narrative is the same. It's constant. We need to create opportunities. We need to be able to develop the ecosystem so that the African diaspora can also be tempted to come back and share the expertise and the experiences with those who stay on the continent. So that, Lisa Marie, we see fewer African youth dying in the Mediterranean, because the challenges are going to be very big, and it's the duty of heads of states and heads of government to create this opportunity for these people to stay behind and thrive, and of course, shape the development of the continent.
Mm-hmm. And so you've talked about Africa being the youngest continent, and also I think 12 million people entering the job market each year, but whose responsibility do you think this lies on? Do you think it's the heads of states? Do you think it's businesses, private companies? Who do you think will help drive this change in terms of creating these jobs, in terms of increasing entrepreneurship?
It's all of us. It's all of us, because increasingly heads of state and head of government will have to have a narrative of a dialogue with the private sector. And as I said, at the end of the day, you know, education, health, social safety net rests with government. But for government to be able to do that, there has to be resources. So it's clear that they will have to lay out the entire, you know, the rollout, all the, you know, everything that they have in their means to create a portion for the youth. And one thing I always say, and I will always say it, I will, you know, I sound like a broken record, but educating our kids, ensuring the health of our people, providing social safety net, it's down to governments. And for a long time, we have thought that this money will come from outside. It will not come from outside. It will come from our own pocket. And whenever I talk about health, education, and social safety net, I do not consider these as expenses because they are investment. And up until we change the narrative, we will not make headway, because these are investment when we make it in young people, just like my parents did for me. They made an investment on me, and I hope I have been able to make them proud and serve my country, and of course serve the continent eventually. So we need to consider these as investment, and we need to put money down there for these young people to have an education, to have health. And we have seen how important these sectors have been recently, with Ebola crisis and now with COVID, how having a very basic primary healthcare system matters on the continent. So we need to invest in that space.
So still staying with entrepreneurship, Africa, well, Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of female entrepreneurs, but it also has they also have the highest discontinue rate. And one of the key factors, I guess, is lack of access to finance. What do you think can be done to change that, and to help people who are trying to scale their business to be able to get the success that they're hoping to achieve?
You know, you talked about women entrepreneurs. Many women entrepreneurs on the continent, they still operate in the informal sector. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, what we are seeing right now, of course, they are the last in, first out of the system. And I do not see many stimulus package that will go to these hairdressers, to these women who are operating in the informal sector. And yet it is so important for them because they need to keep jobs, they need to keep the livelihoods, and they need to support the families. And we all know that in Africa and anywhere else, when you actually empower the woman, you ensure that the family is safe, because the statistics are there that female entrepreneur, and of course who also lead the family, they are those who are more likely to invest in the education of their kids and of course keep the family healthy and all that. So we need to ensure that whatever stimulus is coming out, especially now as we are operating in the COVID area, that these women are not left behind, that we actually empower them, we give them the support. But you know, in many countries, Lisa Marie, we need to change the mindset of people, because you know, we are still living in a very patriarchal system where a woman cannot, for example, even if she has a business, she cannot open a bank account. She cannot go to, you know, to go to the offices and get licenses and all the rest of it without being accompanied by a male, son, father, you name it. I mean, these are things that we have to change, but we need also to provide them with a sound education. And we need also to ensure that, you know, in the society that they are living in, sometimes the male counterpart, the male can act as a mentor, because sometimes women lack this self-confidence to take the next step, to go that further mile, as we say. So we need to keep on improving her self-confidence. We need to keep on telling her that she can do it, and we need to address the ecosystem. But that work will not start now. It has to start with a young child. That's why I always say to everybody, we need to start taking a young girl by the hand, because it's only then that we will be able to make the difference. So learn to take a young girl by the hand. It's only when we take a young girl by the hand that we all rise together. But unfortunately, I have to say it again, like a broken record, that women do not support women. And this is where the problem lies.
And what do you think can be done to change that?
You know, again, we have to say to people that when a woman is rising, you know, it's like a star in the firmament. She will be able to shine on others. And the more stars we get on that firmament, the brighter it's going to be for all of us. But unfortunately, many women do not still understand that by rising with another woman, you know, she'll take the rest with her. And so this is something that we have to keep on educating, and also we have to keep on advocating. And this is what I do most of the time as well, is to say to these girls, you know, take them by the hand, no competition. And there is no harm in being a woman. There is no harm in being compassionate. Compassion is not weakness, and toughness is not strength. So by running down your male or female friends, for that matter, or colleagues, will not make you stronger. And in fact, it makes you weaker, because you show that you're still not secure in what you're doing. So this is the language we have to keep on addressing to women, and we need to keep on advocating this, and we need to also to keep on educating our young girls that they need to take each one by the hand and rise together.
In your own career, where would you say the main opposition came from? Would you say it was mostly men or was it women?
In my case, because as I said, I had a very strange career because I started working in an area which was not serious. So, the issue was professional jealousy. You get a lot of that. And of course, they try to run you down because if you're doing things different. So if you go off the beaten track, you're always the odd one out. So you have to be brought back to the straight and narrow. But again, I found that the major detractors I had further down my career, they have all been women, mostly women. So this is something, again, I really deplore because we really have to make that effort to rise together and, to take them by the hands, and that's it.
And on the theme of talking about COVID, there are 7 countries that have been deemed to be more successful in their quick reactions in dealing with the pandemic. They're Germany, Taiwan, New Zealand, Iceland, Norway, and Denmark. And what they all have in common is that they're led by women. What do you think about their reactions to the pandemic?
Yes, the common denominator, as you say, they have all been women. And if you look at the style of New Zealand and Germany, I just take these 2 examples because they have been very, very, very successful in the way they have handled the whole pandemic. I looked at the style of Merkel and what she did, because she's a scientist herself, she surrounded herself with scientists. And she crafted her narrative on strong science basis. And so she went ahead with that. And we've seen the result because she could actually analyze and digest the information we were giving to her. And if you look at the other side, if you look at New Zealand, I found that Ardern was a very good communicator. And she took really the bull by the horn when she said, we're going to go hard, we're going to go early. And she was also very compassionate. I mean, you could hardly imagine a head of state who was there speaking to the people out of a kitchen, in a t-shirt and with a baby in her hand. And I think the messaging that went out was that you can be strong without having to be aggressive. You can be compassionate without being perceived to be weak. And so she went ahead with this narrative. So these 2, I think, were contrasting, but at the end of the day, they will both get results. So again, if you put the 2 together, having a strong bias in the science, shaping your narrative, communicating, collaborating with the specialists, and being compassionate, being strong, and also taking decisive actions. I mean, they were very good at closing down when it needed to and opened up when it needed to. And and also one thing I've noticed is that they did not consider human death purely on statistics term. They actually draw lessons from that and what we need to do. And this is perhaps something that I haven't witnessed with many other male counterparts, right? And so this is again show that women leadership is different. And I think we have to give women the chance because they bring in a new way of doing things, which has not been, obvious to date, but we have seen in the situation of crisis. One thing I'd like to highlight here as well, because we are talking about the COVID and because we're talking about women empowerment, you'd be surprised well, you're not surprised, but you're aware already that, 70% of the frontliners, over 70% of the frontliners were women. And yet we found that in many countries, less than 25% of women were among the decision makers. So this is lamentable because if we want to actually bring more women on board, we need either to enlarge the table or we need to ask these women to bring the chair to that table. Because as I said again, like a broken record, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu.
Mm-hmm. So looking at leadership, yes. There's currently 1 head of state in Africa that's a woman, and that's in Ethiopia. What more do you think needs to be done to encourage more women to take up and put themselves forward for leadership type roles?
Interestingly, you mentioned 1, but Africa has had 5. And North America, well, we can judge by the statistics, right? So there are, the world of politics as it is practiced nowadays is very brutal. It is very male-oriented, very, very, it's a very chauvinistic world that is out there. And what we find also is that women, society tend to hold them back as well. Sometimes they are very, very keen to join the world of politics, but the societal pressure on women is such that they are not really encouraged in that world. I'll just give you an example. If you are a professional and you go for a happy hour and you come back home late, your parents, your in-laws, society will say, oh, what a selfish woman, because she's coming home late and the kids haven't had dinner, she hasn't bathed the kids and all the rest of it. And when the man will do exactly the same thing, society will say, oh, what a hardworking man. So again, the whole thing is biased. So again, this is something that we have to keep on saying, that the woman is out there, the job, the chores at home has to be shared. And this is again where Nordic countries have a few lessons to teach us, because they have been very proactive in ensuring, for example, parental pay, parental leaves, a work environment which is very pro-women. So all these are there. And maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to adapt what they have done, and they have shown to be very successful. In fact, if you look at the statistics in countries, Nordic countries, I mean, recently I went to Sweden and I saw among the vice chancellors, there were so many women vice chancellors, which is quite an issue on our continent, because there are very few still women vice chancellors. So these are some of the observations I've made. But, they have been out there, they have practiced it, they have got results.
And what do you think the main difference is? Why do you think a Nordic country would have so many women in those types of positions? And what do you think needs to maybe change on the African continent so more women can be in those types of positions?
I think it's all boils down again to the famous governance issue, right? And there is a lot of accountability in these countries. I think in Norway, that if you don't have 30% women representation on board, the country can shut you down, right? So these are, again, this is where, again, these countries are ahead, because there is no negotiation at all on these issues. In fact, many of these countries, they have very, very good index of corruption, and they are corruption free, and they pay a lot of taxes. At the end of the day, they get very good education, they get very good healthcare systems. And we have seen, for example, the education system in Finland, which is quite revolutionary, because and yet it's one of the best in the world. So I think it boils down to governance, to accountability, and this is something that we have to instill in our countries. And I know there are a few organizations on our continent trying to do that, but again, it boils down to us, who we vote.
So I want to go back to STEM.
Yes.
And I saw a figure that says that only 30% of sub-Saharan researchers in all subject areas are women in STEM. So of course that can be raised a lot higher. You have a love for sciences since a young girl. What more can be done to encourage more young girls to get into STEM subjects?
We have to address I'll just use two words and I'll explain. You have to address stereotype, and you have to address the system. Now, if you look at stereotype, I'll just give you a few, again, one anecdote. A few years ago, I had the great pleasure of doing a panel to young girls, and I asked them a question. Give me the name of a few female inventors and a few prominent women scientists, including the very, very famous African scientists who got the Nobel for the first time. Hardly anybody could give me the names of the scientists, let alone the very first African woman Nobel Prize winner. So I was very surprised that not many people knew who Wangari Maathai was. So that's the first thing. We have to address the system, right? And so ensure that we sing the praises of our heroes, and heroes right across the world, the female heroes. Then if you look at the structure of our societies, you find that in many schools, again, let's just go back to stereotype. If you look at the books are full of stereotypes. How men do this, men do that, how women do things. And then if you, of course, take it that much further, you'll find that you'd hardly find any African scientists who've made it and who have contributed. So again, we have to look at the stereotype. Now, if you look at the system, in many countries in Africa, and also true for many countries in Asia, where girls do not even have facilities, bathroom facilities, for example, toilet facilities in many of the schools. So again, these are things that we have to address. So we need to address the structure, and we need to address the stereotype in our education system.
Okay, so we have got some questions that are in the chat box. Let me just scroll through and pick one out. Okay. It's just, all right. Here's one. This is from Angela. So she says, as you've highlighted the positive development in terms of seeing more technocrats at the top, I would like to hear more about women breaking through the glass ceiling to top political levels. What advice would you give, A, a woman, and B, heads of state and governments to ensure that the number of women at decision-making tables are steadily on the increase? So what more can be done to get more women in key positions, political positions?
The word I retain is glass ceiling. Do we have a glass ceiling? I always say that. Do we have a glass ceiling, Lisa Marie? I don't think we have a glass ceiling. We just have a very thick pile of men up there who prevents precisely these women from emerging. Again, it boils down to law, right? I mean, people are always saying that, we should not be using quota. But, this is the only way that you ensure a sufficient number of women out there who will be able to represent the rest of the women folks. And of course, it's a system which we have to go through. We have to adopt, because quota to me is minimum 30%, and if you want parity is 50%. But there are very, very few countries across the world, except of course an odd few now coming up. We find that Rwanda, for example, even South Africa and Ethiopia, they're all making a very, very big, and in fact, at the UN, we found that Guterres has made a very big effort to have almost parity in the appointment of men and women. So it comes with the law. And not just the law on paper, but it has to be implemented, because there's no point having the law and not implementing. I gave the example earlier of Norway, that if you don't have this representation for women, they close you down. So there has to be accountability, there has to be implementation of the law, so that things can change. And also, there has to be a system where we protect those women as well and ensure that they actually flourish. But of course, ensuring accountability at the same time, both for men and women, because when you are out there, the head tends to get very big, and things get done. And so there has to be accountability when you are in this senior position.
Okay, so another question. In view of your expertise in photochemistry and pharma, is there a possibility to have bioactive compounds as an anti-SARS-CoV-2, such as artemisinin or so-called lengana? Forgive me, I'm not sure what lengana is.
I think
sure
lengana is the gaseous remedy.
Right, so if so, is there an opportunity to develop a broader, impactful African plants, natural extracts-based pharmaceuticals?
The African continent is one of the most biodiverse continents on Earth. And yet we don't know, as I was explaining earlier on, we don't take that seriously. By virtue of our history and all the rest of it, we have always looked down on traditional recipes. Now, as I said, just if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, we have over 5,000 medicinal plants. And the World Health Organization will tell you that 80% of the world population in the developing world, they depend on herbal remedies for the primary health care. Now, let's come back to this SARS-CoV-2. Now, before answering the SARS-CoV-2, let's go back to SARS-CoV-1 in 2004 to 2003, the SARS, as we know it. Now, we know that at that time, they were also frantically looking for a solution. And I know, and this of course can be fact-checked, is that people have used extract of artemisinin, which comes from the Chinese plant, Artemisia anua, for which you got the Nobel in 2015. That's what I was answering to earlier on, because this is the plant that treats malaria. And in fact, right now is perhaps one of the very few solutions that we have so far. And we know that SARS-CoV-1 was treated by extract of artemisinin. It was a coronavirus. And this is what happened also in the course of the COVID-2. When the Madagascar, they said they had the recipe for the COVID because it's a coronavirus. And I know that the Max Planck Institute in Potsdam in Germany, they have also been testing. And recently they published that they've got some interesting results against the COVID-19 with the extract of artemisinin, Artemisia anua. And of course, they are going further ahead to validate validate so that they can provide with the right dosage, because it's a plant-based material where the composition varies. So they're doing some works on that. And this is what the Malagasy president had come up with and tested and said, he reported that this was providing a cure to his people. Now, I'm talking about the Artemisia anua, which is a Chinese plant which now grows in Africa. But we have the African equivalent of the Artemisia anua. And yet nobody talks about it because it has not been properly documented and no work has gone on it. Again, I come back to this. The responsibility for safeguarding our knowledge, the responsibility for safeguarding our plant, the responsibility for saving our bioresource rest with us. And we have so much to gain out of our own resources, but we have to take it seriously. Up until the point that we don't take this seriously, we will forever be losing. And of course, on the African continent, we were, up until recently, started slowing down, the highest in terms of extinction of our plant law. So there's a lot to be done. And now with climate change, so it's a race against the clock of safeguarding these plants. You've
mentioned Madagascar and the fact that the government have said that they have something that they might be able to use against COVID, but the WHO have said that they have found, well, they need to do tests on this to find out whether or not something like this would work. In terms of you talking about plants and the species that we have on the continent, what more can be done to make sure people document and are able to test what's already there?
This was the aim of my own adventure in the world of entrepreneurship. When I had the database, I developed at the level of the university. And then I said to myself that, what prompted me to do this adventure, this move into the private sector. I was going to conferences when I was an academic. And one day I went to a conference and, you see outside they sell a lot of products. They were selling nutraceutical agents. And there was one product which was being sold, which had the ability, and I quote, to actually control the level of blood the level of sugar in your blood, which means that it treats diabetes. Of course, you can't make claims like this until you have the solid data to back up your claims. So what they were doing, they were selling this nutraceutical with the ability to control your sugar in your blood. And when I was looking at the literature, I saw many of my references, which was being cited to validate that claim. And I was saying to myself, this is not possible. I don't get anything out of my work except for academic kudos, because I was just publishing in the realm of the finality of an academic is to publish and get publications. But there, my work was being used to validate this. This was when I decided to take the next step out and start my own enterprise. And when I met my collaborator, Mr. Jean Leroux, I said to him, he was also very interested to look into this, because there are so few entities which are coming out of the continent. And yet we know, if you go to Gabon, right, you'll find that Witi people, for example, they will take you to this initiation ceremony where they will give you Iboga. And we know that Iboga is a plant which grows out in West Africa. It forms part of the traditions there. And we know that Iboga has been the prototype for methadone, which interrupts, of course, drug dependency. So there is so much. And of course, not forget, Madagascar has given two very important drugs to medicine. The Catharanthus roseus, of course, the periwinkle, the Madagascar periwinkle, has given two very important anti-cancer drugs. So of course, we need to, but of course, to be able to get to this level, exactly as TUU has done with the Chinese Macropia, we need to start documenting it. And this is again where the weakness lies. We are not doing anything about this. And yet we know that this is the foundation of any work on pharmacognosy and of course, pharmacology of the chemistry and also the chemistry of plants.
So very last question, as we need to wrap up soon. What more do you think can be done to empower more African women and youth in STEM? It's a question we have touched on already, but what are your thoughts just as we're rounding up?
We need to keep on back to what Nelson Mandela had said. You know, we have to keep on educating, because educating. But now we have to go beyond that, because we cannot do educating the rote learning as we have done before, because now we have Google for that. We have a lot of database. So we need to actually make people do things with their hands. We need to make people discover things. And of course, we have to encourage lateral thinking, critical thinking of our youth. And they will be in the driving seat of the continent very soon, but they need to be given a quality education, which was not what I had when I was young. So the quality of the education, the ecosystem we need to build so that we can bring in more women. Of course, not forget that we need to educate our girls as well, because this is where we need to make a special effort, because in many societies, it is still taboo. To not educate, we should not be educating girls. So we need to bring them out. And again, to come back to a very cliche example I use all the time, a bird needs the two wings to fly. It cannot fly with one wing. So if Africa is going to live up to its full potential, we cannot ignore this magic 52% of the population.
Exactly. And on that note, the conversation has unfortunately come to an end. It's gone so incredibly fast. But Miss Amina Gurib Fakim, thank you so much for taking the time to join in this webinar for Women in Africa. And thank you to all of you who have tuned in wherever you are across the globe. Thank you for also sending in your questions. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz Marie.
Thank
And
you.
thank you to your team. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.